I was sitting in my worn recliner, trying to ignore the persistent dizziness that clung to me even after the morning's medication. My hips still ached from the surgery, each movement a careful negotiation between pain and necessity. The afternoon light filtered through the half-open blinds, casting long shadows across the modest living room. My eyes wandered over the quiet chaos, a few stray dog toys, a slightly rumpled couch, and the lingering scent of coffee I'd brewed hours ago. It was the sort of calm I had come to rely on after years of juggling work, family, and home, only to have it interrupted without warning. The phone rang, sharp and insistent, making me flinch. I shuffled over and answered, bracing myself. It was my daughter-in-law. Her voice was crisp, confident, and utterly unconcerned. "You do nothing anyway." "I'm dropping off the kids and the dog this week," she declared before hanging up abruptly. My protest caught in my throat, my words dangling in midair as the line went dead. Shock settled in first, a cold weight pressing down on my chest. I blinked at the receiver, disbelief etching deep lines into my face. How quickly she assumed I would drop everything and comply, as if my age and my recent recovery made me invisible, incapable of refusal. I sank back into the chair, gripping the armrests. 43 years of nursing, raising my son, and caring for this family flashed through my mind. Losing my husband 3 years ago had been a blow I was still learning to navigate. And now, here she was, treating my home and my health as mere inconveniences, expecting me to shoulder her responsibilities without a second thought. Anger simmered beneath the surface, mingled with hurt. The indignation of being taken for granted, of being underestimated, burned quietly, yet fiercely. I could feel it building, a coiled energy ready to be directed. By 2:30 p.m., the doorbell rang. I maneuvered slowly to the door with my walker, huffing slightly at the effort. My daughter-in-law stood there, dragging 2 small dogs behind her, tossing bags into the hallway, and rattling off instructions in a tone that suggested everything was beneath consideration. The dogs were scruffy, their fur matted, and one of the bags had spilled slightly, revealing disorganized contents. I caught sight of a torn shoe and a stained blanket, the kind of careless mess that screamed of thoughtlessness. My protective instinct flared. These creatures had depended on me before, and now their welfare was being entrusted to a woman who barely acknowledged the world outside her own convenience. I observed her casually, noting every careless gesture. She expected obedience, presumed my compliance. I felt the first real spark of resolve flicker. No longer just disbelief, but the realization that she thought she could exploit my age, my perceived weakness, my quiet disposition. Rising anger mingled with determination, a plan beginning to form in the back of my mind. I would not be dismissed. I would not be underestimated. I cleared my throat, carefully choosing my words, the first assertion of authority threading through the room. "I just need to know exactly what you expect me to handle while you're gone," I said, keeping my voice calm, measured, though my heart pounded with frustration. She waved her hand dismissively. "Oh please, it's not like you have anything else to do." Her smile was sharp, a reminder that she didn't just undervalue my effort, she doubted my capability entirely. That doubt, that casual cruelty, ignited something within me. I would respond, but not with impulsive anger. Strategy, intelligence, and careful observation would be my tools. I leaned against the walker, surveying the chaos. The dogs nuzzled against my legs, oblivious to the tension, grounding me in something steady and familiar. I noted the disarray, considered my options, and felt a subtle thrill. Control wasn't lost, not yet. In fact, the very act of realizing I could reclaim it gave me a quiet, satisfying sense of power. The day might have been forced upon me, but the next moves were mine to plan. My mind raced, plotting, anticipating, calculating what could be done, and how best to ensure the household and its inhabitants would be cared for, on my terms. There was a small, private victory in that awareness, the beginning of reclaiming the respect and authority I had been denied for too long. I woke to the soft light of early morning spilling across the living room, my hips stiff but manageable. The memory of yesterday's abrupt drop-off lingered like a shadow over the room. I checked the dogs first, letting my fingers brush over their fur, noticing the subtle tension in their movements, the way they lingered near the couch as if sensing my unease. Their small paws patted quietly on the hardwood floor as I moved through the routine of feeding, administering medications, and preparing breakfast. The quiet ritual gave me a sense of control, even as irritation simmered beneath the surface, a lingering echo of my daughter-in-law's dismissive words. Inventorying supplies became a careful exercise in anticipation. I counted dog food portions, checked for leftover meals, and examined medications for completeness. Gaps in readiness made me tighten my lips, a strategic plan forming in my mind to prevent chaos before it began. My eyes roamed over the living room again, noting a scuffed corner of the rug and a slightly crooked picture frame, minor signs of yesterday's carelessness, but each one reminded me that I needed to assert myself, not just for the pets but for the household order. The frustration sparked something deeper, a determination to act deliberately, with intelligence and foresight. When she appeared, her posture confident, her tone casual, I didn't flinch. I reminded her gently of the household routines, pointing out the feeding schedule for the dogs and the placement of medications. She waved her hand, brushing aside my concerns as if I were just another part of the furniture. My jaw tightened, but inside, a quiet satisfaction stirred. Each small assertion was a claim to authority, a subtle victory. Her dismissiveness, far from discouraging me, only strengthened my resolve. I could see clearly that she underestimated both my awareness and my capability, and that underestimation was my opportunity. I reflected on the patterns, decades of being overlooked, of work and care taken for granted. Times when I had quietly held the household together, when my efforts had gone unnoticed, yet were essential to keeping life moving. It stung, yes, but it also taught me the value of strategy over anger. Recognizing the recurring undervaluation hardened my motivation. This time, I wouldn't simply respond, I would plan, observe, and act with purpose, letting my intelligence guide my every move rather than mere frustration. By late afternoon, small victories began to accumulate. I straightened a few things around the house, organized the dog's feeding area, and ensured every medication was accessible and clearly marked. My daughter-in-law noticed, her brow lifting slightly in fleeting acknowledgement, but her voice remained indifferent. I smiled quietly to myself, savoring the silent recognition. Each small act reinforced my control, my competence, and, more importantly, my confidence. She might think she could push me around, but each subtle success was proof that I was far from helpless. As evening fell, the dogs curled around my feet while I sat back in the recliner, surveying the order I had restored. My mind traced through the day, anticipating the ways she might challenge me next. The irritation from her earlier dismissals had transformed into a cautious anticipation, a readiness to meet the coming tests with calculated intelligence. I felt the first true stirrings of satisfaction and resolve, the kind that comes not from confrontation but from knowing I had the upper hand without raising my voice. The quiet pride was a warming ember in my chest, one that promised control, respect, and the chance to reclaim what was mine by right and experience. I woke to the sunlight spilling unevenly across the kitchen floor, the hum of the refrigerator filling the otherwise quiet house. My hips ached more than usual, a dull reminder of age and surgery, but my mind was sharper than ever. Yesterday's small victories lingered in my thoughts, and I was determined not to let the day slip by without asserting the boundaries I'd been cultivating. The dogs shifted uneasily underfoot, sensing my tension as I moved to prepare their breakfast, their soft whines punctuating the morning calm. My daughter-in-law had arrived earlier than expected, tossing instructions around as if I were merely furniture. My patience was already threading thin. She breezed in, eyes scanning the room dismissively, voice casual but demanding. "Make sure everything's ready before I get back." "I've got meetings all morning," she said, dropping her tote bag by the couch and flopping onto the armchair. I caught the subtle furrow in her brow, the impatience that signaled she believed she could push me again without resistance. My lips pressed together as I remembered the effort it had taken to maintain this home, these routines, over decades. I could feel the simmering indignation rise, but I steadied myself. This time, I would respond with measured control, not frustration. I addressed her calmly, outlining the schedules and rules, citing examples from previous days when her instructions had caused confusion. I didn't raise my voice, and I didn't flinch at her rolling eyes. "I know you have a lot on your plate, but these dogs need consistent care," I said, motioning toward their bowls and medications. The words were simple, but each one carried weight. Inside, a quiet pride warmed me, the recognition that intelligence and patience were my tools. I noticed her shifting, the flicker of realization that I wouldn't be managed passively. My gaze met hers steadily, letting the silence carry my resolve. Memories surfaced unbidden, years of effort taken for granted, nights spent tending to a sick child while her father worked overtime, meals prepared without acknowledgement, small household crises smoothed over while gratitude remained absent. That history now fueled me, reinforcing the logic behind my actions. I saw patterns clearly, recognizing the recurring dismissal of my contributions as a familial constant. It stung, but it also fortified me. If I had learned anything over decades, it was that awareness and foresight trumped anger, that measured assertiveness could reclaim respect without raising a fist or voice. The morning turned toward afternoon as subtle power shifts emerged. She tried to bypass the routines, suggesting alternate feeding times and leaving minor tasks unfinished. I responded strategically, redirecting with calm authority, never scolding, never showing frustration. Each small pushback demonstrated my capacity and patience. The dogs responded to my cues, calming under my guidance, a silent reinforcement of my control. Her brow twitched, a subtle concession forming, the first acknowledgement that I had limits she could not cross. It was small, but enough to validate my efforts and strengthen my resolve. As the day waned, I anticipated future challenges, considering each move she might make and how I would counter without confrontation. A structured approach began to form in my mind, strategies to assert authority, maintain household order, and preserve my dignity. My anticipation was tempered with cautious optimism. I could see the larger picture coming into focus. Each observation, each decision made during the day was a stepping stone, preparing me for the inevitable escalation that would come. Evening settled in with a soft hush over the house. I sank into my recliner, the dogs at my feet, their warmth a quiet comfort. The day had tested me, and I had stood my ground without compromise. The pride and cautious anticipation intertwined, a steadying pulse that promised I was ready for whatever came next. I let the house settle into silence around me, but my mind raced with plans, strategies, and the knowledge that my voice, calm, steady, and firm, would be heard when the time came. The late afternoon sun slanted through the blinds, casting thin stripes across the living room floor, and I moved deliberately, letting the dog sniff around me while I surveyed the quiet chaos of the house. My daughter-in-law had already begun her subtle tests, making offhand comments and snapping minor orders, as if the world, or at least my home, revolved around her whims. "Make sure the pantry is stocked. I don't want the dogs getting anything out of place," she said with a casual flick of her hand, glancing at me as though I should spring to action without question. I watched her closely, noting the slight frustration lining her expression, the impatience that always followed her when she felt her control slipping. Inside, my chest tightened. There was indignation, yes, but beneath it, a calm strategic mind was already mapping the day's moves. I moved into the kitchen, checking the dogs' meals, their water bowls, and my carefully labeled medications. Each item was a small act of order, a subtle reminder that my stewardship was steady and reliable. I reflected on prior interactions, the dismissals, the overlooked contributions, the casual neglect, and mentally cataloged them, noting patterns of disregard and entitlement. Her glance across the room caught mine, but I did not flinch. I let the silence carry weight, a quiet assertion that I observed everything. She attempted another command, slightly sharper, hinting at frustration, but I responded with measured composure, redirecting the conversation to household routines and rules. My voice did not waver, the strength in my tone alone reminded her that I would not be pushed into submission. As I moved through the afternoon, moments from years past surfaced. Times when my efforts had been minimized, when my voice had gone unheard, when the quiet work of care and maintenance was met with indifference or dismissal. Each memory stirred a mix of hurt and resilience, fortifying my resolve. I recognized my endurance as a hidden weapon, patience coupled with awareness. I didn't react impulsively. I let the events of the day unfold, responding thoughtfully to each minor provocation. When she questioned a routine or implied negligence, I calmly corrected the oversight, pointing out facts, not emotions. Every correction was a quiet reminder of my competence. By mid-afternoon, the tension escalated subtly. She tried to circumvent my routines, leaving small tasks unfinished, testing limits. I handled each challenge with discretion, never raising my voice, letting the dog's attentive behavior reinforce my authority. My attention to detail, my consistency, and my quiet control were all actions that spoke louder than words. Her frustration became visible, the crease between her brows deepening, the sharpness in her tone slightly tempered by unspoken acknowledgement that I would not bend. I could feel the first tremors of her discomfort, the tiny concession that gave me confidence. Evening approached, and I sank into my chair, the dogs nestled at my feet. The house felt calmer, but my mind remained alert, calculating the next moves. I had observed patterns, noted weaknesses, and solidified my quiet dominance. The victories of the day were subtle, almost invisible to her, yet deeply satisfying to me. My pride was not loud, but it burned steadily, proof that measured patience and intelligence had begun to shift the balance. Tomorrow promised new challenges, but I knew my limits had been tested and respected. The awareness of my own capability brought a calm vindication as the light faded, casting long shadows across the floor, echoing the quiet yet firm stand I had taken. The afternoon sun was low, brushing golden light across the kitchen counter, and I stood there, hands resting on the edge, watching my daughter-in-law move through the space with casual entitlement. Her voice carried that same familiar tone, clipped and expectant, but this time I met it with something firmer, a quiet authority that she hadn't fully anticipated. "Let me be clear," I said, eyes steady on hers. "In this house, respect and consideration are not optional. You follow the rules I've set, or we'll have a problem." Her lips tightened, the brief flash of unease unmistakable, yet she shrugged it off, masking it with a dismissive smile. Inside, my chest thrummed with a controlled anger, a simmering determination that refused to be undermined. It was a subtle assertion, yet unmistakable. Today, I would not be managed silently. Moving through the kitchen, I began mentally noting each slight, each past instance where my authority had been overlooked, where my efforts had been minimized. I cataloged patterns, small infractions that added up to a clear picture of disrespect. I envisioned possible outcomes and prepared responses, imagining scenarios where boundaries might be tested again. Every thought was deliberate, calculated, anticipation sharpened my mind as I considered which approaches would be most effective without creating unnecessary conflict. Even the dogs seemed to sense the shift, their eyes following me with quiet attentiveness, signaling that I was not alone in this house of subtle power plays. I lingered by the dining area, observing her interactions, noting how she deferred to no one yet relied on others' work without acknowledgement. The small inconsistencies, the microaggressions, became evidence in my mind, mapping out weaknesses and potential allies among those around her. Each observation bolstered my confidence, revealing the contours of influence I could exert if I remained composed and strategic. There was cautious excitement in this, a recognition that the path forward required patience, calculation, and an unwavering sense of my own competence. Sitting briefly, I reflected on the decades of being overlooked, the countless moments when my voice had gone unheard, the subtle erasure of contributions in favor of convenience for others. That history, though heavy with frustration, became fuel. My resolve strengthened, tempered by empathy and the quiet pride of knowing my endurance had value. Past resilience was no longer just a memory, it was a foundation for present action, a reminder that I had withstood far more than a single afternoon's tests. As evening settled, she continued her attempts to push boundaries, small tests designed to see if the warning had teeth. I responded with measured control, correcting minor oversights without anger, establishing presence without raising my voice. Her frustration was evident, the casual defiance now tinged with reluctance. She had begun to recognize that I would not yield silently. The air between us carried tension, and I allowed it to linger, a silent assertion that my authority was real and enforceable. By the time the sun dipped fully behind the trees, I sat quietly with the dogs at my feet, reviewing the day in my mind. The explicit warning had been delivered, seeds of confrontation were planted. I had maintained control, assessed her behavior, and prepared for what was to come. The evening air was calm, but the sense of anticipation was sharp, a quiet triumph in understanding that patience and strategy had shifted the dynamics, if only slightly. Tomorrow, I thought, patience would no longer be enough, action was inevitable, and I would be ready. The morning light filtered through the kitchen blinds, sharp and revealing, much like the tension that had been simmering for days. I stood at the edge of the counter, hands clasped, taking a breath before speaking. "We need to be clear about how things are handled here," I said, voice steady but firm. She looked up from unloading bags, eyebrows raised, as if daring me to push further. There was no hesitation in my tone, no room for negotiation. This was not just about rules, it was about respect. I could see her smirk falter for a moment, but she quickly masked it, shrugging in that casual way that had always pushed my patience. Inside, my heart thrummed with a mixture of anger and empowerment. Today, I would no longer bend to assumptions. Her attempts to sidestep routines began almost immediately, little nudges of passive aggression aimed at testing the boundaries I'd set. I countered each move with deliberate calm, not a snap, but a calculated response, redirecting tasks, reinforcing schedules, and ensuring the dog's needs were met first. I watched her pause, realizing that I would not yield silently this time. Every glance, every action I took was a subtle assertion, evidence of my intelligence and control, and the awareness of it sparked a quiet satisfaction within me. The tension in the air was sharp, even the dogs sensed it, shifting anxiously at my feet. As the day progressed, I took note of the extended family's behavior, observing subtle reactions. Some offered quiet acknowledgement, others indifferent glances. I cataloged their tendencies, mentally mapping who might support my position and who could be swayed by careful influence. Each observation reinforced the strategy forming in my mind, a preparation for what would come next if the disregard continued. My mind was alive with anticipation, every calculation measured, every choice deliberate. The house felt like a chessboard, each move carefully planned before execution. Memories of past disregard surfaced as I prepared for the evening. Decades of being overlooked, of contributions minimized, fueled my resolve. I drew strength from knowing how far I had come, how resilient I had been, and how capable I remained. Pride and patience intertwined, my determination was not reckless, it was seasoned with wisdom and measured experience. I felt the weight of history behind me, but it was not a burden, it was a mantle of quiet authority, one I refused to relinquish. By late afternoon, subtle assertive actions began to shift the dynamics in the house. I addressed minor disruptions with calm authority, redirecting her without overt confrontation. Each small correction was a strategic demonstration of control, and I could see the slight unease flicker across her expression. The energy in the room shifted, the balance was tipping, the first real indication that my presence could no longer be dismissed. This was my small victory, a prelude to the larger confrontations that I knew were coming. As night approached, I paused, surveying the kitchen and living areas. The tension lingered, thick but controlled. I reflected on her reactions and anticipated the next steps, my mind already plotting the escalation that would solidify boundaries further. There was a cautious optimism, a sense of momentum building beneath the surface. She thought I had relented, but I knew better. Tomorrow, she would learn that patience had limits, and I was ready to ensure she understood exactly where those limits lay. The late afternoon sunlight spilled across the living room floor, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch and bend with my thoughts. I sat quietly, letting the events of the past days replay in my mind, analyzing every glance, every dismissive comment my daughter-in-law had made. There was a rhythm to her behavior, a pattern that emerged if one paid attention, and today I intended to see it clearly. The house hummed with an uneasy calm, the dogs at my feet sensing my focus and shifting restlessly, urging me to act but also offering silent company. As I reviewed each interaction, one small detail, a misfiled note, a half-hearted explanation for a minor mess, struck me as a potential advantage. It was subtle, easily overlooked, but I knew how to use it. The pieces were slowly aligning, and I could feel the edge of anticipation sharpening within me. Patience had always been my tool, but now strategy would be my weapon. I moved through the kitchen and into the backyard, observing the patterns of movement and timing. She arrived unannounced at the back door, confident, unaware of the careful mental cataloging I had done. Each action she took, the way she handled the groceries, the small slip in her tone, the inconsistency between her words and behavior, added to a mental dossier I had been quietly building. I noted the slight tremor in her posture when she realized I had anticipated her schedule. There it was, a crack in the overconfidence, a weakness that had gone unnoticed until now. My mind raced, calculating how to act without appearing aggressive, how to turn the overlooked into leverage. Every moment I watched, every gesture I recorded, became ammunition for the quiet war I was preparing to wage. The anticipation was a slow burn, building with each deliberate observation. The question lingered as I moved back inside, how far could I push without fracturing family unity? There was a delicate balance to maintain. I had always believed in justice tempered by wisdom, in asserting boundaries without creating unnecessary enemies. My mind wrestled with the ethics of confrontation, wondering how to expose flaws without shattering relationships. The internal debate weighed heavily, patience versus action, morality versus victory, but I felt no fear. This was not about revenge, it was about respect, and I had earned every ounce of authority I wielded. I drew on the lessons of decades past, the quiet resilience forged through years of being undervalued and dismissed. That strength was steadying, giving clarity to my decisions. By mid-evening, opportunity presented itself. A small misstep on her part, a casual disregard for a household rule, gave me the opening I had been waiting for. Calmly, without a word of accusation, I corrected the issue, highlighting the discrepancy through careful phrasing that revealed her oversight without exposing my hand. I observed her reaction closely, noting the micro-expressions of surprise and frustration. It was validation, quiet but powerful, proof that my preparation and patience had been worth the effort. A subtle shift occurred in the household energy, an unspoken acknowledgement of my capability and authority. I felt a quiet triumph, a confirmation that the strategy one had nurtured in my mind was effective. The groundwork for larger moves in the coming days had been laid. As night settled, I reflected on the day's outcomes, the small victories, and the mental advantages I had gained. The house was quieter now, but my mind remained alert, already anticipating the next steps and the responses they would provoke. She would not see what was coming tomorrow. Each piece I had observed, each insight into her character, was now positioned strategically, ready to be leveraged when the moment demanded. My patience had carried me this far, but it was my intelligence, foresight, and calm determination that would guide the next confrontation. The evening shadows lengthened, and I sat back, feeling the weight of preparation, the satisfaction of subtle victories, and the excitement of the inevitable revelation that lay ahead. Tomorrow, the turning point would deepen, and the pieces would move exactly where I intended. The evening air was heavy, charged with anticipation, as I moved through the house, arranging the evidence I had carefully collected over the past week. Each note, each overlooked detail, was laid out methodically on the dining table. My hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the adrenaline that came with finally stepping into the arena I had been preparing for. The dogs paced at my feet, their small paws tapping in rhythm with my heartbeat, a quiet audience to the storm I was about to unleash. I rehearsed my words, careful to balance firmness with calm authority, knowing that tone and timing were as powerful as the facts themselves. This confrontation would leave no room for ignorance or arrogance. Every move was calculated, every pause intentional. Today, patience would give way to decisive action, and the full truth would be revealed. She appeared in the doorway, confident as ever, unaware of the careful groundwork I had laid. I met her gaze steadily, allowing the silence to weigh, to unsettle. The initial words were deliberate, chosen to highlight discrepancies she had thought harmless, to reveal her minor deceptions in a calm, undeniable manner. I noticed the receipts were misplaced again, I said, letting my tone convey both authority and measured disappointment. Her face betrayed a flicker of surprise, a crack in the armor of overconfidence. She opened her mouth, perhaps to retort, but the evidence I presented, subtle, undeniable, left her momentarily speechless. The shift in power was immediate. I felt the quiet satisfaction of validation as she faltered, credibility questioned in the calmest, most precise way. For once, she could not dismiss me with a wave or a sarcastic remark. The tension escalated as I pressed on, carefully leveraging additional information, a misfiled document here, a contradictory message there. Each revelation was timed to maximize awareness without provoking an overreaction that could harm the household dynamic. Her face shifted between shock, disbelief, and subtle panic as the depth of her missteps became clear. She tried to regain control, offering excuses and half-truths, but the groundwork I had laid in preparation prevented any effective counter. Every move I made was strategic, each statement deliberate, and she realized, too late, that the balance of authority had shifted. The realization brought a sense of empowerment that coursed through me, a vindication decades in the making. By the evening's close, I had asserted full authority, ensuring the consequences of her actions were understood without resorting to aggression. Her faltering confidence, coupled with the evidence now laid bare, left no room for manipulation or dismissal. I observed quietly as the small but meaningful acknowledgement settled over her demeanor. The house, once tense and chaotic, now carried the weight of justice quietly enforced. The dogs curled beside me as I reflected, absorbing the lessons of the confrontation and the enduring power of patience paired with strategy. Though the immediate battle had concluded, the reverberations would extend into the days ahead, shaping family dynamics and ensuring respect would no longer be assumed but recognized. Tonight, the truth stood tall, firmly in place, yet I knew tomorrow held another chapter in this ongoing story. The morning light filtered softly through the kitchen windows, casting long shadows across the floor as I moved quietly among the rooms, observing the subtle changes in energy that had taken root overnight. The house felt lighter, less tense, as if the weight of unspoken grievances had finally lifted. My daughter-in-law kept her distance, her posture a quiet acknowledgement of the boundaries I had enforced. She avoided the sharper edges of conversation, offering small, hesitant gestures of remorse, an apology tucked into a casual remark, a willingness to cooperate where before there had been resistance. It wasn't grand, it wasn't dramatic, but it was enough. Enough to signal that the balance of respect had shifted. I felt a deep, quiet satisfaction in seeing the tangible effects of the strategy and patience I had employed. Even the dogs seemed calmer, sensing the shift in the household dynamic, their familiar routine restored under the steady hand I had asserted. This morning was not about victory in the loud sense, it was about setting a foundation for lasting respect. Later, my son approached, his expression a mixture of relief and admiration. "Mom," he said softly, "I see now how much you've handled all these years and how you did it without losing your cool." The words were simple, yet heavy with recognition. Other family members, once neutral or uncertain, joined in small acknowledgments, offering nods and brief compliments that, layered together, formed a chorus of respect. Even a cousin who had previously taken a distant, passive stance gave a supportive smile, subtle but meaningful. I absorbed their words, allowing the warmth to settle, feeling the fractures in our family begin to mend, not erased, but understood in a new light. The reconciliation wasn't immediate or perfect, but it was real, grounded in recognition of fairness, resilience, and enduring patience. The past could no longer dictate the present, it had been confronted and processed, leaving room for measured healing. As the day moved toward evening, I found a quiet moment in the backyard, the soft rustle of leaves mingling with the fading hum of the neighborhood. I reflected on the path that had brought me here, decades of patient endurance, strategic foresight, and the subtle assertion of self-worth when it mattered most. Every careful observation, every restrained word, had accumulated into a framework of empowerment. I recognized how far I had come, how my intelligence and calm assertiveness had reshaped not only my household but the respect I commanded within it. The lessons of patience, of knowing when to act and when to wait, were etched clearly into my understanding of self. Yet even in this sense of completion, I acknowledged that vigilance would remain necessary. Life was never entirely predictable, and the balance of respect must be maintained. There was satisfaction in knowing I could face whatever came next with clarity and wisdom. Later, as neighbors and friends passed by during their evening walks, subtle nods and smiles affirmed the quiet moral victory I had secured. Community recognition wasn't loud or ceremonious, but it was tangible, an understanding that integrity and resilience carried weight beyond the confines of my immediate family. And in that, there was a subtle reminder that actions had consequences, not only within the walls of our home but in the broader social circles that observed, quietly assessing character and accountability. Even my daughter-in-law, now aware of the social dimensions of her behavior, would feel the ripple effects beyond our living room. Social acknowledgement reinforced what I had already established internally, that dignity and respect, once asserted wisely, endured. As night settled, I sat quietly, the dogs at my side, the air still with the calm that followed resolution. I considered the journey, the confrontations, the strategic patience, the ultimate exposure of truth, and I allowed myself a moment of pride, tempered with realism. Life would continue, challenges would arise, but the foundation had been laid, strong and deliberate. The lessons learned would guide every choice, every interaction, and every tomorrow. The house was calm, the family tentative but stabilized, and the knowledge that I had acted decisively without compromise filled me with enduring satisfaction. The past had been confronted, the present reclaimed. I was ready for the future, prepared to move beyond old patterns, empowered by the wisdom of experience and the quiet strength of resilience.